Welcome, Graham. It's nice to see you again. I wish we could do it in person, but we're not allowed that. So
Last time was in Yorkshire at the end of late last year, wasn't it?
that's right, and that was quite a convocation.
Yeah, that's right.
I want to get into that maybe a little bit later, but I wanted to first of all, I wanted to thank you and congratulate you on the Netflix series, which I think that's. I mean, I watched it, and of course, I'm fascinated by your work, so I don't need convincing. I think it's very hard to make these complex issues accessible to a public that's largely uneducated about these things, and you've done an excellent job, and you've got a lot of pushback, of course, that seems to me that comes with the territory. Uh, I, I was reading your response to the American Association of Archaeologists, or American Archaeological Association. Uh,
Archaeology, yeah, the SAA.
right. I thought your response was measured and masterful, and I think it pointed out some of the some of the shadows in their assumptions, right? I mean, for example, they're accusing you of white supremacy and marginalizing indigenous people. And then if you look at the demographics of the organization, it's 71% white.
Yes,
So,
largely white males. Yeah,
and white males as well. Yes, yes.
very hypocritical position to take, but also a straw man. I mean, this is what I realized in the rather concerted attack that was made following the release of Ancient Apocalypse by actually not a huge number of archaeologists, but by a number of archaeologists who are very vocal on these issues and who have a very fixed and definite view of the past. And that fixed and definite view includes the notion that they can rule out any possibility of a lost civilization, and therefore the what I found myself involved in is a kind of ideological war over the past, and in which the tools of ideology were primarily being used rather than rational and reasonable argument. So I'm dealing with an institution in archaeology that has a very fixed idea about the past. I'm not saying that every archaeologist shares it, but they all subscribe to it in one way or another. And somehow this series of mine directly conflicted with that idea. And what was disappointing to me was the very low level of the criticism. There was very loud. There was a massive amount of it. It all repeated essentially the same 3 or 4 basic themes, as though somebody was reading from a cheat sheet. And there was no real grappling with the material. It was just as though we are figures of authority and we can just dismiss you by saying you're wrong,
That's not something that should happen in science. That's something that happens in cults. And you have made the case, and I think there's evidence to support it, that sadly, archaeology is very much closer to a cult than it is science. I mean, the very nature of science is that you question your assumptions, and you always work from the understanding that is incomplete. We do not have a complete picture of the past, particularly the ancient past, and it seems that for archaeology to assume that, to act as though, well, this is all a settled matter, it's all been decided, and we're not open to questioning about a section of a period of human history about which very little is known. As you pointed out in your letter, there are potentially hundreds of thousands of hectares of inundated land that predate the sea level rise, precipitated most probably by the Younger Dryas event.
Yeah, and there's the whole general meltdown of the end of the Ice Age and the raising of sea levels by 400 feet. It's a broader point that the reaction of archaeology as an institution to my Age to Apocalypse series is, we are archaeologists. We know that there's no possibility of a lost civilization. So even by suggesting that there could have been a lost civilization, you, Hancock, are somehow misleading the viewers, as though I'm not even allowed to express that concept or that idea. But beyond that, the point is that there are huge areas of the world that archaeology simply has not looked at.
Yeah.
The amount of archaeology that's been done in the Amazon rainforest is incredibly small. I mean, for understandable reasons. I'm not saying no archaeology has been done, but what's been done, given that we've still got 5 or 6 million square kilometers of rainforest left, and the tiny amount of archaeology that has been done is revealing the most extraordinary discoveries in the Amazon. Same goes for the Sahara Desert. You know, it was green at several periods during the Ice Age. And again, because it's a very tough place to work, very expensive place to work, very little archaeology has been done. And then, as you rightly say, the submerged continental shelves, you know, an enormous area of the earth. Really, the only archaeology that's been done is looking at sort of medieval shipwrecks, and not really, because they already convinced themselves that there's no need to look for anything else of interest. The idea that there might be actual physical ruins on a large scale underwater doesn't seem worth investing money in from an archaeological point of view, because they've already decided that there's nothing to find. And so it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Yet somebody like me, just on my own finances, with Santha, spending 7 years scuba diving all around the world, we found a load of stuff underwater, which fishermen and local divers were aware of, you know.
Right. So clearly, you know, you're not funded by large institutions or anything on your journalist salary. And as an independent person, I mean, you had the temerity and go look at these places, you know. I mean, you made these many dives and you know, this is what I like and admire about your approach. It's not that you're just dreaming this stuff up, you know, although you've been accused of that. I think one of your more scathing critics says, you know, your information comes through revelation. Well, that's another conversation. But in fact, you're just making the case to the archaeological community and to the rest of the world that, hey, if you look, there's evidence here. I mean, there's a lot of evidence, and the Netflix documentary brought attention to some of it. You know, what I had a problem with the documentary, and it's impossible to avoid. You know, because it is it's directed to the masses. It's a mass media product directed toward people that are not educated. But what it leads in a certain sense is that your scholarship, which is impeccable and meticulous and extensive, it's not going to be accessible to somebody in a Netflix series. People actually have to read your books, and I've read, you know, your key books that talk about this. And then if you look at that and digest that, then it's very, very much harder to be dismissive of this evidence. You know,
that's right.
You bring together many different threads, ranging from genetics to, of course, the archaeological evidence. And so, why do you think I mean, maybe it's a naive question. Maybe the answer is obvious, but you know, why is the archaeological community, institutional archaeology, so threatened by this? You know?
Well, they were already angry with my books, and in fact, archaeologists have been angry with me for 30 years. You know, some of the critics of Age to Apocalypse accused me of declaring war on archaeology, but as a matter of fact, archaeology declared war on me the moment I published Fingerprints of the Gods. and has been in just unmitigated, unceasing assaults on my character and on my personality and on my qualities as a human being by archaeologists, who haven't even read my work. So they were angry already by the books. And why were they angered by the books? Because the books actually reached pretty large numbers of people, millions of people, as a matter of fact. If the books had reached 500 people or even 10,000 people, they wouldn't have bothered. But because the books were reaching large audiences, and presenting a narrative which is contrary to the mainstream narrative of archaeology, this immediately began. This sparked off this kind of immune reaction to the name Hancock amongst archaeologists. So they don't need to read my work. They don't need to look at anything because they already know that I'm enemy number one. And this is the. But then with Netflix, with the magnitude suddenly increases by sort of order of 10, and there's huge numbers of people who weren't familiar with my work who are now seeing this work. And I think archaeologists felt very threatened by it. Ultimately, I think it's about control of the narrative. These are a group of so-called professionals who bond together in professional bodies like the Society for American Archaeology, who have their own hierarchy and their own methods of obtaining kudos and status within that system. And they reacted to me as though I was some kind of virus that was threatening the whole system, and this kind of swarming reaction, which is designed to do harm to me by whatever means. Yeah. Just do harm to this person who we see as an enemy, and actually it doesn't matter what we say as long as it's harmful. Let's pick some of the words that are harmful in our culture today. Oh, let's call him a racist. Let's say he's a white supremacist. The fact that race isn't mentioned in the series makes no difference. If we can just stick those labels on this person, then we're going to harm him. And if we harm him, we'll make him weaker. That's the kind of obnoxious logic that underlies the archaeological reaction to this. And of course, I realized that for many decades, that was also the kind of twisting of reality that came with the way that the mainstream reacted to psychedelics. Psychedelics were subjected to an ideological war, were presented as dangerous, as harmful. All kinds of lies were told about psychedelics.
It's very similar. It's a very parallel situation. I keep thinking as you're talking about this. I in the back of my mind, the spool of one of my favorite quotes from Schopenhauer. Not that I read a lot of Schopenhauer, but his observation on truth. All truth goes through 3 stages, he says. First, it is ridicule. Second, it is violently opposed. That's the state you're in right now. Finally, it's accepted as self-evident. Yeah. And what's happened with psychedelics is a good example of that. The information has always been out there that they have benefits, that they're therapeutic, that, and the same with archaeology. People in the archaeological, institutional archaeology are probably discomfited by the fact that there are huge gaps in knowledge, and so rather than try to fill those gaps, to explore what's there, to do their job, essentially, which is to explore these things, it's easier just to obfuscate and to pile opprobrium on people like yourself who are saying, well, wait a minute, I'm not a professional archaeologist, but I'm an intelligent person. I'm an honest journalist. I can see for myself, what the evidence is. Anyone can go out and look at this. And I've looked at this evidence, and it suggests that there was, in fact, a much more advanced, maritime situation that may date back. I mean, it would have to date back well before the Younger Dryas, which is the event that kind of put an end to the whole thing,
So to the Ice Age.
Yeah.
And this is, apparently an abhorrent notion to archaeology. And if they had indeed conducted detailed archaeology in every part of the world, if they had thoroughly investigated the continental shelves, if they knew absolutely the archaeology of the Sahara and the Amazon, then they might have a better case. But at the moment, they just haven't done enough work. And that isn't science. That's to draw fixed and firm conclusions from a work in progress is a huge mistake, and that's what's happening here. But the thing is that what I object to very strongly is with archaeology as an institution, is this claim or suggestion that they are the sole arbiters of the human past. That we do not listen to anybody else, that anybody else who expresses any kind of point of view on the human past, if it differs from the narrative being given by the mainstream, that person must not be listened to. There are occasions where, quote unquote, amateurs offer something that archaeologists adopt, and they will adopt it enthusiastically as long as it does not contradict one of their main narratives. But if it contradicts a narrative, they will utterly reject it, and will do so vehemently and in extremely ugly ways. And it's only really as time passes, as was the case with psychedelics, and as more and more information comes out, that it becomes absurd to hold such a position, as it became absurd to hold that position about psychedelics. And I hope we see the absurdity of the archaeological position exposed in my lifetime. I'm not confident of that, but I hope I do.
Well, I hope you live long. I hope you live a long time, Graham, and I hope you live long enough to make them eat a big plate of crow, because what you've described is exactly what happens, it seems, when institutions become ossified. They become, constrained by received doctrine, by dogma, actually. Yep. And that's not what science is about. So that's anti-science. Science always should work in the light of the perception that they don't have a complete picture, and new information can come along at any time and completely overturn your accepted paradigms and so on. That's what makes it exciting. That's how knowledge advances, And so it's disappointing to see this, but again, not surprising. I mean, it's on the academic level, it's sort of it's a little more genteel, but you see much the same thing happening in the political discourse. If you repeat lies enough, people begin to actually believe them. And look at the States. We've managed to completely flummox, a third to a quarter, a quarter to a third of the electorate that believes that the election was rigged and all of this nonsense, and it saddens me, Graham, because people do not think for themselves. That at the core of what we're talking about, it's people's desire to abdicate their ability to think for themselves. So this is what religion does. Religion, organized religion, does very much the same thing. Hey, we have the answers. Just as long as you don't keep asking these pesky questions. Just accept the articles of the family.
Like a ready-made module that can be slotted into the brain. You don't have to ask any questions. Here's all the answers. Yeah, that's absolutely true of religion, and unfortunately, it's becoming more and more true of science as well. Is that science is being spoken of in religious terms, that science has all the answers, and that there are no other answers to find. And science is a wonderful method of exploring certain aspects of reality, but there are other aspects of reality that are much harder to explore with science. And that touches on the issue of psychedelics. But we should never have unquestioning faith in science.
Faith is totally out of place. That's the thing. I mean, as I often say in my raps about psychedelics, faith is an impediment. Faith is not required to take a psychedelic. What is required is courage.
Yeah, that's right.
Part of that is putting your assumptions aside opening yourself to whatever the experience is, and then dealing with that, so it takes courage. Faith is a set of, as I understand it, a set of assumptions, pre-existing assumptions, without evidence. So it's anti-science. Science.
And it's the abdication of responsibility to think for oneself, which is what it comes down to, which is one of the huge problems in the world today. And it's very ironic, really, is that we in a sense have all the tools available for people really to think for themselves, but actually it's not happening. There's a tendency to discourage independent thought and to lock people into different blocks of thought and ideas, and I belong to this group and you belong to that group, but we're all fucking human beings,
And any number of people willing to pander to that, because they see their control of these demographics, these different silos. That's their path to fame and fortune and notoriety and all that. But it's fundamentally dishonest. And it's true what you're saying, that science is a beautiful thing, Yeah. Pure science, as you say, and I agree, it's just a tool. It's a tool for asking questions of nature in a very systematic way, getting answers back that can be more or less verified, or, do the answers explain the data or not? And the result is always we need more data, because everything we understand is an incomplete picture. So, I think there are scientists who practice pure science, but then it is becoming increasingly difficult for science to retain that purity, because it's an institution. It depends on grants. It depends on academic prestige. It depends on all of this infrastructure to make it work. I mean, we're far beyond the era of the gentleman scientist like Darwin or Mendel, who could go out into his garden and contemplate, the nature of inheritance and so on. Now you need $150 million grant to look into these things, or some do. So it's a quandary. As a scientist, I do have admiration for pure science and dismay at the way it's essentially been distorted and misused. And
well, I think if I may come in there, one of the ways that it's been misused is that very notion that it does have, or ultimately will have, all the answers to everything. That is, to my mind, that is a misuse of science, and particularly, I think Rupert Sheldrake calls it this physicalist bias in science, that things have to be material in nature in order to be really grasped and handled by science. So things like entity encounters in a DMT experience, while they can be quantified to a certain extent, it's very hard to explain. It's very hard you can't really weigh and measure them. You can't dissect them. And yet they're there, and they're real. So I think that the limits of the scientific method are tested by psychedelic experiences, by visionary experiences, but not only by those. Then there's all the other questions that we've never really resolved, which physicalist scientists dismiss, such as telepathy or telekinesis, whether these powers are present in the human mind in some way, and we're just not using them. These are all no-go areas for mainstream science. You get laughed at if you think about them. Look at the terrible problems that Rupert Sheldrake has had over the years just for doing very reasonable scientific work on telepathy. It's this ruling out of whole areas of inquiry on the basis of preconceived notions about the nature of reality. That's a huge problem in science.
And this is exactly what's going on in archaeology, and you're right. So I'm glad you brought up the question of the DMT entities. I knew we would get here sooner or later. You and I were just recently at this rather amazing conference in the UK last October. So what do you make of all this?
I've never known exactly what to make of it since I first started having those encounters myself, which in many ways much is owed to your wonderful late brother, Terence, that I became familiar with the issue of ayahuasca at all. But my first entity encounters did take place in the Amazon rainforest, drinking ayahuasca, and subsequently have continued with vaped and smoked DMT. They're compellingly real, as everybody who's volunteered I mean, this is what's fantastic, is that actually I believe at Johns Hopkins and certainly at Imperial College in London, this work is now being done to try and investigate what is going on with the entity encountered. The remarkable thing is, I can speak of my personal experiences, you can speak of yours, but what the research seems to be showing is that people are reporting back the same kinds of encounters and experiences with the same kind of entities. And that normally, when there's enough testimony of an encounter or experience, we have to begin to suspect that it's real. And it seems to me that's the case. That's where we're at with these encounters as well. And have they brought novelty into human society over the years? One of the reasons I got into researching the book that was published in 2005 called Supernatural was the work done by Professor David Lewis Williams at the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa, comprehensively proving that cave and rock art all around the world is fundamentally visionary art. And it has an astonishing amount in common with the art that is being produced in the Amazon by people who've had the ayahuasca journey. And this art shows entities, and these entities are teachers, and people learn from them. We both know of scientists who claim to have had sudden insights during a psychedelic journey that have changed the whole way that they look at things. So there's something very mysterious going on. Is it just that it releases locked down functions in the brain and allows the brain to function more generously, or are we really in contact with other dimensions? I'm still not settled on that, but I prefer the other dimensions idea personally.
Why is that?
I just do. I just like the idea that there's a doorway in the mind that we can open, and we're perfect. We're beautifully evolved to fit in this physical universe, but it doesn't mean our minds have to be confined to this physical universe. And what psychedelics at the peak level seem to offer is a doorway into some other level of reality, and it's deeply mysterious, and I cannot begin to explain it, and I don't think anybody can. But I know that my life has been fuller, that I've been privileged to enjoy an ongoing adventure, which I would have missed if I had not had these experiences. And I don't know where that adventure is going to lead yet.
Well, so, in discussing these entities and these encounters, I think a person has to be very careful how we throw these words around,
Okay. Yeah.
Simple words like real,
Yeah.
I mean, I start from the premise that anything you experience is real,
Right.
You experience it, therefore it's real. But then we can begin the conversation. Okay, does it come from the unconscious? Is it something within the mind that presents itself as not being in the mind? Or is there really something, some entity, some dimension out there, where these things are happening? But then dimension has a very pretty precise definition, and you have to drag the physicists into this, and how are they gonna explain this? Or is it some hypothetical spiritual place? Is it I mean, here that's to me, that's the question. I think that not that the information that you get from these encounters is not valuable. Clearly it is.
Well, quite often it's not.
And quite often it's not, right? Exactly. So it's kind of like ordinary life, there's only so many things you can take away from it. But I mean, does it even matter whether it's real in the sense that there's another place out there, somewhere in hyperspace, or whether it's maybe in the collective unconscious, or maybe in a part of the brain that's normally inaccessible to us, but whether it's these things, whichever of those we settle on is going to be important in determining what questions we ask going forward. I mean, my brother used to, go through this exercise too. He would take large doses of mushrooms by himself. And, with ayahuasca and mushrooms, how you can set up this I-thou kind of separation where you actually seem to be in telepathic communication with an entity that isn't you, as far as you know, and that you're having this conversation. And he would always try to say, well, tell me something I can't possibly know, tell me something I can't possibly know, and then I'll know that you're real.
Yeah.
But it's a conundrum, because how do you define what you can't possibly know, because you can't possibly know it, So you get into a kind of an epistemological.
And why would the entity want to prove that it's real anyway? It's a trickster, It might not be. This is the mystery. This is the mystery that we're grappling with. In a sense, you ask, does it matter? And in a sense, it doesn't matter. I think what matters is that this is a mystery that is worthy of much further investigation than it has had in Western cultures. Of course, it's a mystery that's been deeply investigated by shamanistic cultures for thousands of years, and has led to certain conclusions. I'm convinced that it's what led to the conclusions that the ancient Egyptians came to about the afterlife, about what happens to us after death, the journey of the soul through the duat, the challenges that are faced, the passwords that you need to know, the entities that you encounter are very often therianthropic. A lot of this is definitely, when I look at the ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead or the Book of What is in the Duat, I'm looking at visionary experiences for sure. I think they were, in a targeted way, exploring whatever that realm is, and kind of that's now what's happening at Imperial College, but with a very medical model, which is essential in our society today. There's no other way they're going to get permission to do it. But at least they are in depth exploring the phenomenology of this experience. And it's just like, if we discovered a new continent on Earth that we hadn't actually nobody had ever been to before, and it was inhabited by intelligent beings, we definitely want to know what's going on there.
Basically.
Or not. Yeah, that's the other thing. We could say, no, actually, this isn't good. Let's leave them to their own thing, or maybe they're vastly more powerful than us, and we better stay away from them.
Yeah, given the reaction of institutions to these discoveries, like, oh no, we need to sweep this under the rug. This doesn't agree with the accepted paradigm. But I mean, one of the beautiful things about psychedelics, I think, is that they are disruptors. They are catalysts for conscious change, and both in individuals and on the societal level, and even on the species level. And so in that sense, they're very useful because, again, it seems to me that what drives knowledge, whether it's scientific or other types of knowing, is curiosity, an impulse to understand what's going on with these phenomena. And psychedelics open the door wide on the question of, well, what you think is going on is probably not what's going on. There's so much else happening that normally, we're opaque to, because the brain is, the default mode network and all that. The brain is programmed to filter most of this stuff out under ordinary circumstances, because it's not helping us, with our material existence. It's not adding to the value of our 401ks or whatever. It's, these are questions that come up just and are worthy of pursuit just because they're unknown, and every effort to push knowledge back is a little bit of light shed on, what is essentially we're surrounded by a sphere of the unknown. But, we're never going to answer the final questions, but we can add to what we know. And that's, this is something that psychedelics always consistently remind me of, that, you people, you scientists especially, there's no room for arrogance. You need to constantly remind yourself how little we know. Yes. We, as a species, as an individual, we understand a tiny slice of reality, and even that is subject to revision at every turn. That's, if we're honest with ourselves. So, where do you think psychedelics are going to? How is this going to evolve? It certainly is a mixed thing. I mean, we've reached a point where we knew it was coming. There was acceptance, and then how do you see the current situation with psychedelics and society, acceptance into medicine and those sorts of things?
Well, I mean, the acceptance into medicine is the Trojan horse, which gets psychedelics into the rest of society. But of course, psychedelics are already in the rest of society.
Right.
They are accessible. They grow freely in the fields. In many cases, if you have enough knowledge of mushrooms to know one mushroom from another, they've always been part of the human story. But now we've passed through 60 years of the war on drugs, 60 years of vile and vicious propaganda, hate campaigns, marginalizing of groups who showed any interest in so-called drugs whatsoever. So that legacy is still hanging on to human consciousness right now. And then the next thing, of course, because we're run by governments and governments like to control things, is they're saying, well, we can't keep the floodwaters at bay anymore. It's unreasonable. We're going to look stupid if we keep on denying any benefit from psychedelics. So now let's see how we can control it. And then they're going to impose all kinds of management structures upon it. And you're going to have to go through an authorized professional, and I'm not so happy about that. I'm not sure the authorized professional is the only way to go. It shouldn't be, there should, so it takes great wisdom on the part of those who are making legislation around this subject, not to just turn it into a new form of restriction and not to allow certain companies to get very rich on it either.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's leading to these conundrums, well, if we can't control it, let's cash in.
Yeah.
And then that leads to, again, what we've always done is marginalize indigenous people who have been the stewards of this genetics and this knowledge for so long. And you'd think finally we would reach a point where we would say, hey, you guys have been the stewards of this. You deserve a place at the table, a big place. And some companies are saying that, and others are very, very profit oriented,
Yeah.
But it's very interesting, the evolution that's taking place. I totally agree with you. I think that plants and fungi, these secret psychoactive plants and fungi, are really the common heritage of humanity, and access to them should not be restricted or unduly. I think caution and education is very important. Yeah. People should come to those things, from an informed place. But the access should not be restricted, and they shouldn't have to pay $50,000 to go to a clinic to get that kind of treatment. Then that becomes the psychedelic tools are dominated by a corporate elite, essentially, a corporate and the medical industrial complex, once again, takes it over and tries to co-opt it. They've done this many, many times. You're familiar with the whole history of biopiracy, most of our food plants and many of our medicine plants. But these are different because these change people's minds. Even CEOs, may have their perspective shifted if they're not careful.
If they dabble deeply enough, they almost certainly will. And this is why ultimately, despite all of the cautions that I've just emphasized, I'm happy to see psychedelics re-entering civilization openly. And I do believe in the wisdom of the plants. It sounds like a very mystical thing to say, but again, it is a mystical thing to say. But I think they know what they're doing in a certain way. There's some sort of co-evolutionary connection with human beings that's going on here, and this is
self-evidently true. I mean, again, the one of the primary messages that I've gotten from ayahuasca on numerous occasions is just remember, you monkeys only think you're running the show.
Exactly.
And in fact, we're not. I mean, the community in terms of what is sustaining life on the planet, it's the community of photosynthetic organisms and fungal organisms that are their symbiotes that are keeping parameters within the fairly narrow limits tolerable for life. And of course, we monkeys, we're pushing back on that in every way that we can, trying to disrupt this. So this is concerning. I don't worry about life on Earth. I mean, potentially we control technologies that could wipe out all life on Earth if it got completely out of hand. I worry more, but I think that Earth is very tough. I think that, life has extreme resilience, and tends to maintain its equilibrium. I think our species is more vulnerable than we would like to believe. And we may be at risk. I mean, I guess
very vulnerable. We could just be another one of those very short-term evolutionary experiments, which kind of runs its whole course within about 1 million years.
Yeah, exactly. And if you look at the timescales that the Earth operates on, that's a blink that's a very short time, which is another reason why I think that the work that you're doing suggests, I mean, for example, we know that, I think the current thinking now is that Homo sapiens, neurologically modern humans, probably are about 300,000 years old.
Right.
It used to be maybe 100,000. Now that's been pushed back to around 300,000. So they had all the neurological and cognitive tools available to them to ancient peoples as we do.
Yeah.
Why is it so crazy to think that they might have developed a fairly sophisticated maritime astronomically based technology 20,000 years ago, 30,000 years ago?
And part of the spin that the archaeologists who didn't like the series put on this is that somehow my series was taking credit away from indigenous peoples. Absolute rubbish. Quite the opposite of that. If there was a lost civilization, I see it as a civilization that emerged out of shamanism, as every other civilization on Earth did.
Yeah.
There's just no doubt. Everything that we call a civilization, that we recognize as civilization, has got shamanistic roots, and those roots go way back into the past. And all I'm saying is that within the diversity of shamanistic societies, it's not absurd to consider a few who might have developed in different directions, in other directions. So let's just keep an open mind to that, But I think the basement of all of this is shamanism. And shamanism is in its own way a profoundly scientific enterprise. I mean,
yes.
If you the discoveries made by shamanistic cultures in the Amazon are quite extraordinary and almost impossible to explain, actually, in many cases.
Well, and yeah, it is right. Shamanism is, in some ways, the first science in a certain way, because it was experimental. A lot of it, I mean, at base, a lot of shamanism is people mucking around with plants. What happens if we take this and that? And, what if we put it up our nose or up our bum? Or this is driven by scientific curiosity. Shamanism are experimental ethnopharmacologists. That's what I call them. And it's very experimentally. It's very experimentally based. But the interesting thing is it's ancient enough. That not only science came out of it, but also theater and poetry and all of these other things as well. I mean, shaman are performers. They're shaman or showman, or women. I mean, they were partly. And
so you can say it's the origins of all culture, really. The amazing thing is that that it wasn't just a stage in the evolution of human culture leading to us. It's still an ongoing reality in the world today. Shamanistic cultures coexist with Western industrialized societies today.
Yeah.
And there's the arrogance of the technological societies, that we act as though we have nothing to learn from these people, as though we owe them nothing, whereas in fact everything is owed. And huge amounts are to learn, particularly in the psychedelic sphere, actually. If that's, you asked the question about going forward with psychedelics. If it's going to happen in a healthy, positive way in Western technological societies, it's going to need input from shamanistic culture.
Yeah, I agree. I think any paradigm going forward has got, it can't be just the biomedical paradigm.
Yeah.
The shamanistic paradigm has worked fine for indigenous cultures, but as these cultures come together, you've got to have some kind of a hybrid approach to them. That
I mean, that's appropriate.
Psychotherapy and the best of shamanism. I think the psychedelic, the psychedelic therapy of the future is going to look more like shamanism than it will to these clinical studies that are done. Not to dismiss those. I mean, they have to work under constraints, I mean, they have the FDA and other regulatory bodies insisting they have to do it a certain way. But in some ways, I think the opportunity to really explore has to be undertaken under looser parameters. And the shamanistic approach with the ritual and the music and the sound and all this is the right vessel for that.
Very well thought out, very tested and tried over thousands of years.
Right.
It really does work. I'm not sure when I'm going to have my next visionary journey. I suspect sometime this year, but I'm not sure when. The last time I drank ayahuasca was 2019, and I feel I've got
mention of that's the last time I took any psychedelic as well.
Could it be because COVID got in the way? It could be.
Well, I want to get back to it. I mean, things sort of shut down with COVID. There wasn't an opportunity to do it. And then in the last 3 years, I've discovered a few issues about my heart. So I had some cardiac procedures recently. And I'm not going to stop taking psychedelics, at least I hope. No. But I'm going to be very cautious about what I take. I think perhaps things like, 5-methoxy DMT and these things that raise the blood pressure, maybe that's off limits for me now. But I certainly, I still think mushrooms are quite safe, and even ayahuasca to a certain extent. So
I think ayahuasca is safe, but if you're physically compromised, particularly if you've got heart issues, ayahuasca is very demanding physically.
Mm-hmm.
So, not to say psychically as demanding as well, but physically at that physical level, it's a very demanding medicine to take.
I think it's a little more demanding than mushrooms. Mushrooms are just about the perfect psychedelic in terms of the compatibility with human metabolism and all that. But I haven't given it up, but I'm just waiting for the right opportunity, So
that makes sense. I'm in no rush either myself. I've had a lot of ayahuasca experiences, quite a few other experiences. I'm in no rush to add to those. It's not like putting another notch on the belt or in the
I'm long since past the stage where I never was a psychedelic cowboy, although I've been sort of misportrayed that way. I'm actually very cautious, but I'm long past the stage where I have to try every new molecule or every new plant. That's a younger person's game. They can do it. I tell them I'll be watching closely. Send me a full report. So
it's in areas where speaking personally, there are a few areas where I still think that there's important work I need to do. I'm not in a rush, but I will do that work when the right time come. And the other thing I want to do, I just pray, this is something I'm just really hoping for, is that one day I'm going to come across the right combination of plant medicines that will get rid of my migraines forever, because these migraine headaches are just torture for me. They make my life miserable, and I hate taking the big pharma medications for them. And then I discovered it at that conference we were at in October, that the big pharma medication is just a slightly tweaked version of DMT. Well, you can imagine the way my mind is going after that.
Well, what about microdosing with LSD? You're aware of cluster busters. You're aware there's considerable. Does any of that work for you? Small doses of LSD or psilocybin?
Part of the problem with living in England is it's quite difficult to obtain necessary ingredients, but not impossible. And I've not been consistent with microdosing. I've tried a bit here and there, didn't see any magical results, got bored with it and stopped. I think probably what I need is one very major psilocybin journey at some point. This is what I'm hearing about migraines, is that big journey is very important. Microdosing, yes, that's important too, as a sort of maintenance, but there's some sort of breakthrough possibility. And I do know people who've had migraines helped with psilocybin.
Well, I hope that you get that, and then the psilocybin, the microdosing can be used to support that after that big journey. I do agree. I think you need the big journey, and then everyone needs that. And then in some ways I am skeptical about the benefits of microdosing. I think this may be people who are afraid to actually step off the cliff or open the umbrella and get into it, but they can pretend that they're hanging out with the cool kids. They're taking psilocybin. So, well, we're coming up to an hour, and I don't want to keep you too much longer. How is Santa, by the way?
Santa's fine. Santa went through a very bad episode of pneumonia.
I'm sorry to hear that.
And we were in America. Ancient Apocalypse was launched on the 11th of November, 2022, and we spent about a month in America doing various shows and promoting the series. And during this time, Santa contracted a very severe bacterial infection in both lungs, which was her lungs are compromised anyway. It was pneumonia, and she was hospitalized. It took her literally until about 2 weeks ago to get over it completely.
Wow.
But she
give her my best. Tell her I hope she recovers soon.
I will, absolutely. And it's motivated me to do something I've needed to do for a long time, which is get my driving license back, because I had this problem with epilepsy, and I lost my driving license, but I'm entitled to get it back, which means that Santa wouldn't have to do all the driving anymore.
That would be good.
Yeah.
Do you have some travels planned?
Yes, there's going to be a lot of travels in the coming year.
Would you be coming to Vancouver, possibly?
Yes, possibly. Possibly. I'll update you on this before too long.
Okay. Keep me posted, because we can certainly, if you wish, we can certainly organize something that I think would bring a lot of people out. I really cherish the memory of the time you came through Minneapolis. It was kind of a spontaneous thing, but we got it together, and that was a landmark event, and that was great. Now, of course, I've relocated to British Columbia. I managed to escape the develop, the situation in the States, and no regrets. Of course, we have many friends there, but we're happy to be living in a slightly saner country.
I can
only slightly, not complete lunatics in charge,
Yeah.
So
I'm afraid the lunatics are running the world all over the world at the moment. This is the problem. When I look around the world, I see very few politicians who I feel even the faintest respect or admiration for. They're just self-serving liars, basically.
We need to get them. We need to get the brew inside these people, but
that's the answer. That's the answer.
It's a tough thing, It's tough to get them in that situation, and it may not work. I mean, a shaman I respect a great deal said there are two kinds of people I will not give psychedelics to. One is schizophrenics, the other is sociopaths.
Yeah,
and because it doesn't work. So
their defenses are too high.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for taking time. This has been a great conversation.
Really, really nice to talk to you again. We should do this more often, and we'll definitely be crossing each other's paths sometime this year. So I look forward to seeing you.
Okay. Keep me posted, and I will do the same. Thank you so much, Graham.
Keep well. And thanks to your team. Everybody was great. Cheers, Dennis. Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.